The Scholar and the Cabbage Maiden, the Yang Naiwu case. In the final decades of the Qing Dynasty, when the empire's old bones creaked under the weight of foreign powers and internal decay, a scandal erupted in the small county of Yuhang in Zhejiang. It would travel far beyond its narrow canals and tiled rooftops, eventually being recorded in history as one of the four great legal cases of the Qing. A tale of beauty, desire, and the machinery of injustice. The winter that year was especially damp. In the marketplace, smoke curled from braziers. Hawkers called out prices for roasted chestnuts and candied hawthorn, and the pale light of the sun made every surface look cold to the touch. Among the townsfolk, one man stood out, Yang Naiwu, a scholar of some local repute. Tall, calm-spoken, dressed in simple but well-kept robes, he was the sort of man people nodded to in the street. He had studied for the imperial examinations, but, like many in those waning years, had found official appointments scarce and often decided by politics more than merit. There was also a young woman known to everyone as Little Cabbage. Her real name was Zhang, but the nickname had stuck since girlhood. In the countryside, cabbage was a humble, beloved food. Calling someone by that name suggested freshness, simplicity, and a certain sweetness. She was married to a tofu seller, a quiet man whose mornings began before dawn, pressing pale blocks of bean curd in the icy air. In small towns, a glance could become a story. One afternoon, Yang was seen speaking to Little Cabbage by the canal, the bare willow branches swaying above them, their voices lowered against the wind. It was likely nothing, polite words, perhaps a question about the price of tofu, or a comment on the cold. But in a place where boredom was a constant companion, curiosity filled the gaps. The sight was told and retold, and in each retelling the distance between them grew shorter, the tone more intimate. By the time the rumor reached the tea houses, it was whispered with raised eyebrows. The scholar and the tofu seller's wife were meeting in secret. The months wore on until one bleak morning, Little Cabbage's husband fell ill. At first it seemed an ordinary sickness, an ache in the belly, a sourness that made him wince, but it worsened quickly. Within days, he was vomiting, fevered, clutching at his middle as if trying to hold himself together. His skin grew pale, then yellowed, and before the week was over, he was dead. The funeral was small and quiet, but the whispers returned, sharper now. A healthy man dead in days. It must be poison, they said. And who could have done it but the wife, with the help of her lover? To those inclined to believe the gossip, the answer was obvious. Yang's name began to circulate again, now coupled with murder. The county magistrate took notice. It was a case that could demonstrate his decisiveness. A dead man, suspected adultery, the shadow of poison. Official physicians were ordered to examine the body, and soon they claimed to have found traces of arsenic. It was all the magistrate needed. Orders went out to arrest Yang Naiwu and Little Cabbage. They came for Yang in the early morning, bursting into his study where an open book still lay on the desk, the ink on his brush not yet dry. Across town, Little Cabbage was taken from her modest home, still in morning dress, her hair pinned with a simple wooden comb. The two were dragged separately to the yamen, where the magistrate sat beneath the high beam of authority. The accusations were read aloud: adultery, conspiracy, and murder by poison. Both denied everything. Yang's voice was steady, Little Cabbage's soft but unshaken. In the law of the Qing, however, a confession was the heart of a conviction. And confessions, if they did not come willingly, could always be forced. At a signal from the magistrate, The executioners stepped forward. The executioners moved with grim familiarity, their hands calloused from years of work. Wooden rods were brought out, ropes tightened, and the magistrate's voice echoed through the cold chamber. If you are innocent, then why not confess to prove your sincerity? Such words twisted the logic of justice into something cruel. Yang Naiwu gritted his teeth as the first blow landed, the pain shooting up his leg like fire racing along dry grass. He knew the law, knew that each lash, each tightening of the cords was meant not to uncover truth, but to force a shape upon it, the shape the magistrate already desired. In another room, Little Cabbage's cries rose and fell, muffled by the thick wooden walls. Days became a blur of questioning and punishment. Between sessions, the prisoners were thrown into damp cells, the stone floor leaching warmth from their bodies. They were denied proper food, given only thin porridge, their wrists raw from shackles. Each time they were brought before the magistrate, the accusations had grown more elaborate, now involving secret meetings by moonlight, whispered plans, and arsenic hidden in tofu soup. Finally, weakened and battered, Little Cabbage broke. She nodded through tears to the questions put before her, not because they were true, but because each nod promised the pain would end. Her confession was copied in neat black ink, sealed with her trembling fingerprint. The magistrate leaned back, satisfied. Yang was confronted with her statement, and when he refused to sign his own, the beatings grew savage. His voice hoarse, he maintained the same words. I am innocent. I will not admit to what I have not done. The case was quickly wrapped up. In the eyes of the county court, they were both guilty, adulterers and murderers. Yang was sentenced to death, Little Cabbage to life in prison. Their fates seemed sealed. But outside the yamen walls, the story spread like wildfire. In Hangzhou tea houses, in the markets of Suzhou, people shook their heads over the injustice. Friends of Yang petitioned higher officials, citing the lack of real evidence and the obvious coercion in the confessions. For a long time, these petitions were ignored, until one reached the ears of a provincial governor, known for his distaste for corrupt underlings. The governor ordered a retrial in the provincial capital. Under stricter supervision, the original medical report was examined again, and cracks began to show. The claim of arsenic traces was found to be exaggerated, the testimony of witnesses suspiciously identical, as though rehearsed. Word leaked that the county magistrate had personal grudges against Yang's family, and that the tofu seller's sudden death might have been due to illness rather than poison. For the first time in months, Yang and Little Cabbage saw sunlight without shackles. In the new court, they were questioned without torture. Yang spoke calmly of the events, how he had only exchanged polite words with Little Cabbage in public, how rumors had transformed civility into scandal. Little Cabbage, frail but clear-eyed, recanted her earlier confession, explaining it had been forced from her under unbearable pain. In the end, the provincial court overturned the verdict. Yang Naiwu was cleared of all charges, his name restored. Little Cabbage was released, though the cost of her freedom had been months of suffering that left deep scars. The case became a lesson in the dangers of rumor and the failings of a justice system where power often outweighed truth. In the years that followed, storytellers would recount it under flickering lamplight, their voices dropping to a whisper at the mention of the magistrate's cruelty. And so, the tragedy of Yang Naiwu and Little Cabbage took its place among the 4 great legal cases of the Qing. Not only for the injustice done, but for the rare moment when truth, against all odds, was allowed to prevail.